Hi, it's Rich from Teach Me Music Academy, and today I'm going to be talking to you about amp settings and tone. So there are a number of different amps available to you on the market when you're playing your electric guitar, and it's important to understand what works for you and what works depending on the type of music that you want to play. However, it can be a bit of a mess and you can get lost quite easily with what you're looking for, and we all know that salesmen are really good at selling you what you don't want. So I'm here to walk you through the very bare basics of that and help you understand your amp a little bit more before you start to make decisions about what you wish to purchase. Before we start looking at the individual settings on an amp, let's talk about amps in general and what's available to you when you're looking for the right sound for your electric guitar. So there are numerous different amps available to you on the market when you're looking for your signature sound with your electric guitar, such as cabs, heads, combos, solid states and valve amps. That can all seem a bit overwhelming. Once again, let's break that down even further. First, let's talk about heads, just like this one here. The head is just the bare basic controls of an amp. No speakers attached, just your dials for your tone, volume, EQs, and all those other bits and bobs that you need to set your sound up. The advantage of something like this is it's portable. You can carry this around wherever you need to, and they're great for gigging because someone somewhere will just bring a cab, which is the speaker like this, that everyone can plug into one by one, because all you need is a couple of leads and you're boom, ready to go. Obviously, the issue with this is that you don't have a speaker already plugged in, so you would have to invest in a cab or at least have the means to access one when you do want to practice, which is why amps like a combo amp are much better, because a combo amp has both your amp controls, like on the top of here, and your speaker all built into one. They're brilliant for home practices, they're brilliant for little jam sessions in a practice room. Combos come in a lot of different sizes, shapes, and it's really good fun to kind of go through and have a little play on a few just to figure out what's your signature sound and what benefits you as a guitar player. So now let's talk about solid state amps and valve amps and the main difference between the two. Solid state amps use electrical transistors, whereas tube amps use vacuum tubes, also known as valves. Transistors operate a little bit differently from valve amps in the sense they don't naturally distort the more you push them like a valve amp does. You'll hear a lot of guitar players say that valve amps sound best when they're pushed, and they give a little bit of distortion the more gain you start to add, whereas normal transistor amps like solid states don't, leaving quite a brittle sound, although for some players that's exactly what they're after. Also, as we move into this digital age, it's worth pointing out that more and more people are relying on amp simulators and process controls rather than solid states or valve amps. These amp simulators simulate the sound of a valve amp or a solid state as best they can. Obviously, these amp simulators are compressed and gated, meaning the sound is very flat in terms of signal, but for some people, that's exactly what they're after. You'll find this kind of amp very, very common in the metal scene especially. So now we've outlined the very bare basics of an amp, let's look at the specific controls that you'll find on most amps, things that are commonly found on every single amp regardless of make or model, and how you utilize them to affect your tone and to get the perfect sound for your playing. So the valve, head and cab behind me do have controls on them on the very top here that you can't see. So instead, for this demonstration, we're going to show you a combo amp with both the amp and the speaker attached. You'll find these controls on almost any amp, as we said, so it's all in common. So starting from the left, we're going to have our jack input, which is where we're going to input our jack lead going directly from our guitar, feeding the signal into the amp. Next up, we have our volume dial for our clean channel, which, as the name implies, controls the volume of the signal. Nice and simple, nothing else to know about that. Next up, we've got our drive knob, also known as the gain knob. Now, gain is different from volume, and it's important to note that, even though sometimes cranking up the gain can have an effect on the volume. The gain controls how much signal is passing from the guitar into the amp. The more gain we have, the more we're likely to distort that sound, which gives us that classic rock sound that we associate with more heavier genres like rock and metal. I'm going to give you an example now and start the gain at a low number so you can hear it, then crank it up a little bit higher so you can hear the difference and hear how crunchy and distorted that signal becomes. So the more we crank that signal up, the more we can hear that distortion and the louder the volume increases, which, as we've said, is a little bit different from the normal volume controls. Next up, we have an individual switch that will flick us to a distorted channel. You'll find this happens on a lot of amps. It means we can separate our clean tone from a distorted tone. Next to that, we've got 3 individual controls named bass, mid, and treble. Now this is where we have to split our sound into 3 different sections, as this helps us equalize the sound a little bit better. I'm going to go through this bit by bit, turning each dial down so you can hear it completely out, and then turn it up so you can hear it full and hear the difference it makes as we talk about the different sounds that bass, mid and treble can have on your EQ of your tone. So we'll start with the bass. When I turn the bass down, I'm going to have every other dial, mid and treble, at 12 o'clock position, about halfway, so we still have a nice balance of sound. This is how the guitar sounds with absolutely no bass. And now we're going to crank that bass up to 10. So the bass, just like the instrument, controls the low end of our sound. It gives us the depth and that oomph to our sound. The more bass, the more of that rumble in your chest you're going to feel when you play. Next, let's move on to the mids. This is what the mids sound like turned all the way down. Now, let's turn the mids all the way up. So the mids, as the name implies again, controls the mid-range of your guitar. If when you're playing, everything sounds a bit muddy and you've got no clarity, chances are you need to sort your mids out. Crank them about halfway and work from it from there. Finally, let's have a listen to the high end of our sound, the treble. Here's what it sounds like turned all the way down. And here is the treble turned all the way up. So the treble controls the high end, it gives it that bright, crisp clarity. So if your sound sounds a bit muddy and you want to really kind of make those higher notes, especially on your higher strings, resonate, try cranking that treble just a little bit more. Now obviously to some of you out there, that difference in rolling those tones might sound really, really subtle, or in fact, almost impossible to hear. So if you want to find out how it sounds a little bit better, pop some earphones in and try rolling off your tones one by one. Remember, your bass will control your low end and that oomph, your mid controls the clarity, and your top end controls that crisp, bright sound. It takes a little while to get used to, but with enough practice, you'll begin to hear it. So you'll find certain presets are more common in other types of music, but we will be covering that in other videos, so I don't want to go into it too much. But at the end of the day, it's all down to your personal preference. Some people prefer a much bassier sound. Some people prefer to scoop their mids, which means turn them right down. Other people prefer to push their treble sound and really get a very quite crisp, clean sound. It's going to be completely up to you and dictated by the music that you play. So play around and find your signature style. Lastly, let's look at a few additional features that most amps have. On the very end of this amp, we've got a reverb dial, which allows us to add a little bit of effects into our sound, just like this. Reverb creates that kind of little echoey effect, as if you're playing in a really big open room or inside a deep dark cave, so you can hear that little bit more of your guitar sound as you stop playing and it fades out into the distance. Sometimes you might have other effects on your amp, like delay, or maybe even a bit of chorus and flange, but once again, we'll cover that in another video. These are the basic controls that you'll find on almost any amp. No matter which amp you're playing, which model, which make, have a little play around and start defining your sound, because that's going to be integral to you as a player and how people will perceive your music. Good luck having fun with that, and we'll catch you in the next video.